In this video article, we're going to look at what I think are 3 non-negotiables for aspiring fiction writers. 2 of them I'm sure you'll be aware of. The third you may not be aware of, or you may only be peripherally aware of it and not codified it in your head and given it a name. So it'd be worth watching the video to check that out. I've also sneaked in a 4th item which I think is a non-negotiable. You'll find that towards the end of the video. Before we jump in, if you want to get an email with a time-stamped overview every time I release one of these videos, head over to my website deliberate-practice.com, sign up for my email list. There's other content there, plus over the weeks and months to come I'll be adding some email subscriber only content as a thank you for signing up and to make it worth your while for entrusting me with your email address. Okay, there's 3 non-negotiables. The first 2, as I've said, are really obvious. The first one is you need to write. The longer you go without writing, the longer you are just an aspiring fiction writer. Once you start writing, you are a fiction writer in my book. You don't need publication to validate that. And I can't remember who, I think Brandon Sanderson said this, is there are people who play basketball in their 40s for fun. They've got no aspiration to be in the NBA or in the leagues below the NBA. You can treat your writing like that. It can be a hobby that brings you pleasure. You don't have to publish to validate. Obviously, all of us want to publish and see people read our work. But the point is, or it's a secondary point, you need to write. And at the end of the day, a writer writes, and it doesn't matter if your writing never gets publication. If you do it just for yourself and you're happy with that, that's fine. In my book, that's great. You also need to read. This is another obvious one. There's a couple of videos on my channel that mention this peripherally. One is called something like read 10x and 1 level up, and it's a concept from Stephen Barnes, who we'll talk about more in a moment. And Steve said, if you're writing, let's say, 500 words a day, you need to be reading at least 5,000 words a day, and ideally 1 level up. Go and find that video. That's quite an interesting one and an interesting concept that I've taken to another level. And then also I mentioned in my first video, Ray Bradbury, his suggested reading diet for writers, and he suggests writing a short story a week. For some people that's too much, but his recommended reading diet was before you go to sleep, read a short story, read an essay, and read a piece of poetry. And you can go and find Ray talking about that in various videos as well. But however you do it, you do need to be reading. The third non-negotiable is you need to create a regular time. I probably should have put and place in parentheses there as well to write. Stephen Barnes, we mentioned him with reading, calls this the golden hour. Now, Steve has been teaching for a long time. I first found him around 2005, I think. He used to write on a blog called Darkush, and when I was prepping this video and I wanted to talk about the golden hour, which I learned from Steve, I couldn't find much publicly available info from Steve on this, but I did find something on his blog from 2010. He's changed his thinking somewhat since then, but it will sketch out the essence of the concept that you need to know, and you can start building a mental representation of the concept, attaching it to this name, codifying it, and start actively looking to incorporate it into your writing. So, golden hour. Steve said you can create a career with just an hour a day, and this is what Steve calls the golden hour. You need to accept the idea that 1 hour out of every day belongs to you. It's doesn't belong to your job, doesn't belong to your husband or your wife or your kids. It belongs to you. If you are a writer, I suggest that Monday, Wednesday, and Friday you flow. Just create rough draft with no attempt to edit it. Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday you do your editing, polishing the work you did the previous day. If you learn to focus properly, there is no reason in the world you can't learn to produce 1,000 words of rough draft in an hour. That's enough to produce a novel a year in just an hour a day. And I'll talk in a moment about the maths of writing and Brandon Sanderson, but just to put that into more concrete terms, if you followed Steve's plan, you'd end up writing 3,000 words of fiction a week. Do that for 50 weeks of the year. That's 150,000 words. In most genres, that's enough for a good-sized novel, and maybe enough left over for 10 short stories or a couple of novellas, 2 or 3 novellas. So that's what you could produce with that. But if you're starting out, an hour and 1,000 words might seem overwhelming. So I will make the caveat, it doesn't have to start at an hour. Your golden hour, and I still would recommend you call it that and codify that in your head. It might only be 30 minutes, and your word count target might only be 500 words. There's a video on YouTube you'll find on Brandon's YouTube where he talks about the maths of writing, and you only need 200 hours of writing at 500 words an hour to create a novel a year. So 200 words of writing would give you 100,000 words, split over 50 weeks of the year. That's only 4 hours of writing. So if you're more of a hobbyist, you can easily find 4 hours of writing split into 5 45-minute sessions or something like that, or 2 or 3 half-an-hour sessions during the week, and then maybe a couple of 90-minute sessions Saturday and Sunday. But there are some important things you need to do when you're in your inverted commas golden hour, and those points are: you need to create regular periods of time. They don't have to be at the same time of day, depending on your routine, your work, your family. You might have irregular actual times that you start writing, but if you can write at the same time repeatedly, the brain will pick up that habit and it will get easier to do that. But those periods of time are just for you. Your family and friends don't get to disturb you. So if you live in a house with your wife and your kids, you either do it when your kids are asleep. That's how I used to do it when my kids were young. And you tell people what you're doing. Easiest way to stop your friends disturbing you: turn your phone off. And you should turn your phone off and turn the internet off when you're writing anyway, to cut down potential distractions. Also, I would say set a word count goal. When you're starting out, you might just set a word count of 200, 300 words, but something that's achievable. And as you get more used to it, you can then gradually up that word count goal. Now, it doesn't even have to start with more than a sentence a day. And this is another idea from Steve. It's enough to get you started. And if you write one sentence a day, you did it every day, a sentence is probably 15 to 20 words. The end of the week, you'd have 150 words. If you keep doing that, after a month, you might only have 600-700 words, but you'll have a habit forming, and then you can up it to 2 sentences a day, and you double your word count. You start building your word counts up like that. It's also interesting to note that if you can't write 1 sentence a day, if resistance is too much for that, maybe you want to have written and you don't want to write. That bullet point could be 2 or 3 videos on its own, but I'll leave that there for you to ponder. The other problem or possibility is that the fictional process might be new and potentially overwhelming to you. And if that's the case, I did a video this week actually. I'm just going to tell you what the date is. I'm terrible with dates. 16th of August 2025. So I did a video this week, 3 videos ago I think. I did 2 videos on Brandon Sanderson outlining from the end and writing forwards, or outlining backwards, writing forwards. And then the one before that was Scales and Arpeggios for Writers. And this, go and check that out, and that gives a simple exercise that you can do that you'll have no emotional attachment to, but will get you putting fictional words, i.e. words that you invent, onto the page. So that might be something that you can use to help you get through if you find the concept of actually putting words that you've invented on the page is a barrier. This may help with that. And talking of the concept of scales and arpeggios for writers, I think aspiring writers should have a 4th non-negotiable as well. And that non-negotiable is practice. And writing fictional words isn't practice. And I'm going to debunk that thoroughly in future videos. And I think the most pernicious myth that affects writers is the myth that's out there that you have to write 1,000,000 words of crap before you start writing anything of value. There is a truism that if you write multiple novels or multiple short stories, there will be an improvement. But I think that you can accelerate your growth as a writer by using deliberate practice and deliberate play, which are two associated concepts. To my knowledge, I've never seen anyone write about deliberate practice for fiction writers properly, and I've certainly never seen anyone even mention the concept of deliberate play. I've been studying deliberate practice since 2008, and I only discovered deliberate play about 6 months ago, and it was a missing piece in the jigsaw for me. So that's going to be something that I'm going to be talking about in future videos on the channel. So closing out, this was a short video. If you're an aspiring writer, you know to get to the writer part of the equation that you've got to write. You probably know that you've got to read as well. Multiple reasons for reading. It gives you inspiration. Sometimes you read something that's crap and you go, my God, that was so bad. I can write better than that. But the other thing that reading does, and you can also get this from watching quality films and quality TV series, is it starts filling your story banks with ideas that can be repurposed into your stories. Every writer does this. And the more you read, the more quality stories you consume, the more you'll get images, ideas, scene ideas, character ideas that can be blended into new stories and that people won't know have come from other people's stories. And I'm not talking about plagiarism, it's just creative. I'm not sure there's even a word for it, but it's like creative borrowing, if you like. You go, that's really interesting. There's a scene in this film where this happened. That could happen in my story. Obviously, my story is set 300 years in the past, so that would have to change and this would have to change and blah, blah, blah. But writers do that. And I recently found out, I went on holiday and read the first novel in the Expanse series, which is called Leviathan Wakes, and I didn't know anything about the author before I read it. And when I came home and started researching, I found the author was actually two authors, and James S.A. Corey is a pseudonym, and they have a Patreon going on, which is due to end soon, which I joined as soon as I found out about it. And 2 years ago, they started a project to write a novel, and they've been documenting the exact process they've undergone. And what's really interesting, I'm on about episode 5 or 6, when they're talking about plotting, one of them will say something like, well, what about that scene in Alien where this happened? That kind of thing could happen here. And they reference films, they reference books, and they're talking about this creative borrowing. They're not copying, and I'm sure when we get to actually, if you've been in the Patreon, you've probably read some of the chapters. They're up to chapter 26, I think. They're close to the end of the book. When you get to those creative borrowings, if you didn't know they were there, you probably would never know. So you do have to read for that. But you've probably not come across this concept of the golden hour before. And it's a really important concept. So you set time aside for you, family and friends aren't involved, and you give yourself two options. You can write, or for me, I either stare at the wall, which is that way, or I stare out the window, which is that way. And those are the only things you can do. And that after about 10 minutes of boredom, you'll start writing, if you're disciplined enough to do it. So if you've got any questions on that, drop me an email, paul@deliberate-practice.com. I'm also putting together a resource for aspiring fiction writers. I mentioned scales and arpeggios for fiction writers. I've been putting those exercises into the vault this week, and I've already got 12 or 13, and the exercises will cover, I made a list of 10 or 12 genres that I'm going to cover, and I'm hoping to get to the point at some stage where I've got 30 exercises for each genre. So that will be like 350, 360 exercises. So whatever kind of writer you are, you'll be able to come into the vault and go, hurrah, Here's 30 exercises I can do over the next week or 2 weeks that will really help me get fictional words on the page. There'll also be a link to that in the description below. Do go and check that out. And thank you for your time. And I hope that's been of interest to you. And if you haven't consciously created a golden hour for yourself and for your fiction writing, I can't recommend highly enough that you do. I'll catch you in the next video.